Okay, so this is part 2 of lecture 6, and we're going to look at the monetary aggregates in the US and in Europe. So I'm going to try to follow this link. It's going to be in your lecture notes if you want to browse around yourselves. So here's the Federal Reserve release, the most recent release of the monetary stock measures in the US as of September 1st. And you can see that the latest date we have is July 2016. And the numbers here, first table is showing monetary aggregates M1 and M2, and you can see how much larger M2 is compared to M1, roughly 4 times. And here you can see that both aggregates have been growing for the last 12 months. If you want the exact details on what the Federal Reserve includes as a measure of monetary aggregates, it's here. So M1 includes currency outside the Treasury and the Fed, etc., 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 demand deposit, checkable deposits, etc. And then M2 adds saving deposits, time deposits, and balances, etc. So you can read that very carefully. And this table 2 gives you smoother measures, the moving averages, so we'll skip that. What's more interesting is you can see the components of M1 here, and you can see that there's currency and demand deposits that pretty much comprise the entirety of the M1. And there's also traveler's check, but that's obviously a very small amount. Following down, you can see the non-M1 components of M2, so it's M1 plus. And you can see that there's savings deposits at commercial banks and thrift institutions, small denominator time deposits at commercial banks and thrift institutions, and institutional money funds here as well. But you can see that mostly what we are looking at is saving deposits at the commercial banks. This is the majority of the non-M1, M2. Going on, you can see what we saw not seasonally adjusted, so we're going to skip it again. And these are other items in case you're interested, money in the foreign institutions, etc., etc. Okay, so let's compare that to the information that the European Central Bank is providing. This is, by the way, a great website if you want any data from Europe. The ecb.europa.eu is the ECB website that contains a lot of data. Another page is Eurostat that contains a lot of information that doesn't have anything to do with monetary policy. So this document here gives you the development of monetary aggregates and also breaks it down by components. And you can see that unlike the Fed, the European Central Bank is measuring monetary aggregate M3 and is describing its growth. And you can see that M3 is growing a lot slower. Here's the red line. Hold on. M3 is growing a lot slower than M1. It's much larger, but it's growing at a slower pace. And you can read through the description of all different aggregates. And here you can see what the M3 counterparts are. So M3 mostly includes the loans extended by banks. And you can see that some of that is extended to private sector, which is yellow. And the blue part here is what extended to general government. And the overall M3 is shown with this purple line. And net external assets, you can see for Europe, are actually negative. So there is lending to Europe that we observe in the, I guess, mostly this year, 2016. Okay. And then if you want to really compare how the Fed and the ECB are measuring different money aggregates, you can look at these components of M3. And here it breaks you down into M2, of which M1 is a part, currency and circulation and overnight deposits, just like in the US, mostly overnight deposits. And then to get M2 that doesn't include M1, Then you have deposits with maturity of up to 2 years and redeemable at notice of up to 3 months. And the marketable instruments, which is M3 minus M2, the parts that the US is no longer measuring is repos, money market mutual funds, and debt securities, so the bonds that are issued with maturity of up to 2 years. And there is a breakdown of who this money is given to. So you can study that at your leisure if you're interested in more details. Here you can see how it breaks down as loans. Loans to households, loans to non-financial corporations are roughly the same size. And that's it. So going back to the lecture slides now, we can see that in recent years in the US, the money base has increased dramatically during the crisis. And we're going to talk at great length late in the semester why it happened. So basically, in 2 words, the Federal Reserve has put a lot of liquidity in the system and then expanded its balance sheet a lot during the crisis to help economy run and help banking institutions survive. At the same time, economy wasn't growing as fast as the monetary base was growing, which means the multiplier has declined dramatically. So in the past, a small increase in the money base would reflect in the increase in economic activity, just like you learned in macro. Now, when the economy is close to liquidity trap, the interest rate is very close to zero, the money multiplier goes down. And you can see exactly what happened. So the economy wasn't growing very fast, even though money aggregates were increasing quite dramatically. So in the US, the multiplier that was around 1.8, so I think in macro, usually kind of assume it's 2, fell to below 1. What it means is that banks are not increasing the supply of M2 when the supply of hard cash provided by the Fed is increasing. So the multiplier comes from the fact that when the banks have more reserves, they increase the lending by more than 1 to 1. When the crisis happened, the banks did not want to lend to anybody. And so even though they increased their reserves, which are held at the Fed and a part of the Fed balance sheet, they did not use this money to increase their lending. And a similar situation happened in Europe, where you can see it's a different ratio. So the multipliers are much higher because here we're looking at the ratio of M3 to M0, as opposed to here in the US, we looked at M1 over M0. But you can see basically that the lending has declined dramatically as well. We're going to stop the part 2 here and see you in part 3.